Okay, we have done all of these and the major stories that regard them, which means we are now heading to Jehu, who is in line number 5, king number 10, Israelite king number 10, line number 5. And his actual place where he is found in Scripture is in 2 Kings 9:2 to 10:36, 9:2 to 10:36, and 2 Chronicles 22. 2 Kings 9 and 10 is really what you're saying. 2 Kings 9 and 10, 2 Chronicles 22. Now, here's the thing. I want to zero in on 2 Kings 10 because I only have enough time to cover the one story, but it's really the typical story from Jehu's life, okay? And here's what I want to talk to you about in the closing of our class. The one thing that you refuse to surrender will become the thing that defines your life. If you surrender everything to Jesus Christ but relationships, that will define your life. Everything but a bottle, that will define your life. Everything but your hobby, that will define your... Everything but being important in someone else's eyes. Everything but your son or daughter. Everything but... Fill in the blank with anything you want. Whatever you withhold will become your story. Now, it doesn't have to be. You certainly can give God the hardest thing. But you know there's an old rule about when you have a bunch of stuff to do on a Saturday and you have to get up and you got this whole list. What's the thing you do first? According to the best writers out there, what do you do first? What's that? Do you do the easiest thing first? If you take out the hardest, it all gets easier, right? Let me suggest this. There's one thing in your life that's harder for you to surrender than anything else, and that's where I'd start. You don't negotiate with God, so you can't negotiate off the hard thing after you do lots of other stuff. But here's how we think. If I give him all the other stuff, he'll kind of let me off on that last one because he'll know how much I gave up. It doesn't work that way. So a life that settles on some non-negotiable area of life that isn't surrendered to him becomes a selfish life. And, religion assuages guilt, but relationship surrenders in love. I don't know if this is going to be meaningful to you at this stage of your life, but let me just say this. If you have a relationship with someone else and they're willing to surrender to you in every possible way, lovingly, but there's some area of their life they won't let you in, that will become the focus of your relationship. It really will. And everything becomes a contest about that. Let me show you in Jehu's life. His name means Jehovah. He is Jehovah, Jehu. He is Jehovah. And it's an illustration for our own choices in following God. Take a look at 10:1 through 9 for a minute. Somebody read 10:1 through 9.
Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria, and Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria to the rulers of Jezreel, the elders, and to the guardians of the children of Ahab, saying, Now, when this letter comes to you, since your master's sons are with you, as well as the chariots and horses and a fortified city and the weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house. But they feared greatly and said, Behold, the two kings did not stand before him. How then can we stand? And the one who was over the household, and he who was over the city, the elders and the guardians of the children, sent word to Jehu, saying, We are your servants. All that you say to us we will do. We will not make any man king. Do what is good in your sight. Then he wrote a letter to them a second time, saying, If you are on my side, and you will listen to my voice, take the heads of the men, your master's sons, and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow about this time. Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were rearing them. When the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messenger came and told him, saying, They have brought the heads of the king's sons, he said, Put them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. Now in the morning he went out and stood and said to all the people, You are innocent. Behold, I conspired against my master and killed him, but who killed all these?
Jehu was not a king. He was a usurper. That's why the line of Jehoram ends here. Jehu was prophesied, and I didn't tell you the backstory because of the time. He was prophesied as ending the king's family, and he literally caused the beheading of all of the children and the offspring of the line of Jehoram. So the line of Omri, Ahav, Ahaziah, Yoram, that line ended there. The reason that there were 70 children was not that Yoram was so prolific. It's all the children of the household that could possibly inherit the throne. Meaning, if you're 4 kings deep in this, there's lots of cousins. So don't get the idea that, Jehoram was, had lots of wives and all that. It's not that. Now, here's the thing. Jehu comes and he kills off, under a prophecy, he kills off 2 kings, Yoram and the king of Judah. He is now used as an assassin. He wipes out the Judeans, he wipes out the Israelite king, and he's a bad guy in some ways. Look at what surrender isn't in this story. In the first 9 verses, surrender isn't accomplishments. It's possible to see the size of our accomplishments and think God is convinced of our total surrender because we've gotten a lot done. Listen to me carefully. Just because you do great things for God doesn't mean you have greatly surrendered the one thing. If you're harboring the one thing, it's coming up in guilt and washing against you no matter what you're accomplishing for God. He took 70 sons and grandsons, and the family was surrounded by elders and that guarded their welfare, and he had them go out there and kill them. He did a huge thing. He cleared off the household of the Omri dynasty and made it wide open for a new king. That's a huge accomplishment. He got people to conspire to kill 70 kids. He got 70 heads delivered. But that's not accomplishment really, and it's not a substitute for the one thing. Look at verses 10 and 11. Somebody read that.
Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he spoke through his servant Elijah. So Jehu killed all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men and his acquaintances and his priests, until he left them without a survivor.
Now listen to me. Just because there have been great speeches, accomplishment does not replace the one thing, surrender. Nor do speeches replace the one thing, surrender. So it's not something that we say that makes us obedient. It isn't the power of God's work through us because we spoke words. Listen, you can speak great speeches and still not have surrendered the one thing. Do we all know that? You can go out and accomplish great ministry, but that one thing is still back there. And it's still nagging you. It's still back there. For a lot of people, they spend the better part of their Christian life in a prayer that sounds like this. I won't. Oh, I did. I feel terrible. I won't do it again. I won't. Oh, I did it again. I won't do it again. The one thing. It's not accomplishments. It's not speeches. Look at 12 and 13. It's not circumstances. It says, then he arose and departed and went to Samaria on the way while he was at Beit Eked of the shepherds. Jehu went to the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and said, who are you? And they answered, we are relatives of Ahaziah, and we've come down to greet the sons of the king and the sons of the queen mother. The providential dealings of God worked on your behalf might make you feel like you've been totally obedient, but there's a difference between God giving you blessing and obedience. Jehu looks like he's on the rise. Jehu has got everybody following him. The circumstances are going with Jehu. Guess what? The thing not surrendered is still not surrendered. Power doesn't substitute for surrendering the one thing. Look at verse 14. He said, take them alive. So they took them alive and killed them at the pit of Beit Eked, 42 men, and left none of them. See, all of a sudden, it's possible that we could look at the obedience of those around us. When I speak, they take lives. I can raise my finger and they will stand at the wall and throw themselves off. I am powerful. That's not the same thing as the one thing being surrendered. What I'm trying to say the long way is that it's very easy for us to come to the place in our mind where we accommodate sin in our mind, overlook it, and look at all the circumstances and powerful things God is doing and use that as a substitute for the surrender of the thing God's telling us to surrender. And if you understand what I just said, you are like most people handling the Word of God today in pulpits across this country. The fact of the matter is, people hang on to sin even when God does great things through them. It's not circumstances. It's not power. By the way, it's not companions either. Look at verse 15. It's possible you can surround yourself with the right people that speak out for God, good people, and thereby conclude that you're walking with God in total obedience. But you're not if you're not. Look at verse 15. When he had departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. And they greeted him, and he said, "Is your heart right as my heart is with your heart?" And Jehonadab answered and said, "It is." And Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." And he gave him his hand, and he took him up into the chariot. He said, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." So he made him ride in his chariot. Look at this. Jehu had a prophecy that he would clean out the house of Ahab, and he thinks he's doing something zealously for the Lord. Now, here's the thing. You can get to the point where you're reading the story and you're missing what's going on underneath of it. Jehu's not a good guy. This kind of brutality is not what God called for. Yes, God said, "I will end the line of Ahab." That doesn't mean you go and behead everybody. He's doing God's will his way. That never works. And by the way, in verse 17, there are some exceptions. It's possible in the midst of successes, we'll overlook our little lies and we'll say, "But I'm doing what's for the greater good." Do you know how many people live their Christian life like this? I'm doing the greater good. Listen to this. Verse 17, when he came to Samaria, he killed all who remained to Ahab in Samaria until he had destroyed him according to the word of the Lord which he spoke to Elijah. Then Jehu gathered all the people and said to them, "Ahab served Baal a little. Look, Jehu will serve him much. Now summon all the prophets of Baal, all his worshipers, all his priests. Let no one be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever's missing shall not live." But Jehu did it in cunning, so that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. Now he's going to lie to get everybody in one place so he can kill them, because if you have to do wrong to do right, it's okay. Let me just say it this way. The ends don't justify the means ever. The ends don't justify the means ever in God's economy. Because that presumes that the only way to do right is to do wrong to get there. And that's not true. There are other ways to end Baal. Now, one of the other things that people do is they go, "Well, yes, it's true. I haven't been right, but there are exceptions in my case." Or how about this one? Legalism. Legalism. It's possible that you can get so caught up in following God's program instead of walking with God and surrendering to Him daily that you can make up rules for all the believers around you. Do you know anybody like this? I'm just going to make up some rules, and that's a surrendered life. If you follow the checklist of the rules that I set, that's a surrendered life. Wait a minute, it's not. What's the difference between fulfilling a checklist of things set up in legalism and a surrendered life to God? Any of you who have ever had a boyfriend or girlfriend know there are rules to relationships. Like dating somebody else at that time would be outside the rules, right? There are rules to the relationship, but if the relationship becomes rule primary and relational secondary, it becomes perverse. You know, where you're not getting along at all, but he says, "Well, I haven't looked at anybody else." Yeah, but you don't like me. Okay, so what's the point? You know, if it's not driven by the rules, if it's not driven by the relationship, it becomes driven by the rules. The tension exists between rules and relationship. The problem is when everything gets pulled to one side, it's no longer what it was intended to be. Jehu is doing all things that ultimately match prophecy. God did say that Ahab's life would be cut off. He did say that. That doesn't mean you have to kill them all or convince people to, but he did say that was going to happen. Okay? Just because God said, for instance, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord, does not mean you need to hold guns to everybody's head and get them to do it. There's another path here that we can work that doesn't have to be, let's bring it about in man's understanding. What I'm saying to you is the one thing not surrendered is what was driving Jehu, and we haven't gotten there yet. Here's what I know. It says, Jehu said, sanctify in a solemn assembly, verse 20, and they proclaimed it. Jehu sent throughout Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. Trying to tell you that everybody got there. And when they went into the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other, then he said to one of them who was in charge of the wardrobe, bring out the garments of all the worshipers of Baal. So he brought out the garments for them. Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab, as son of Rechav, and he said to the worshipers of Baal, search and see that there is here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but only the worshipers of Baal. So I need you to check out, make sure everybody here is on your list, and there's nobody here who's really like a sneaky Yahwist who came in here to the Baalite ceremony. Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now, Jehu had stationed for himself 80 men outside, and he had said, the one who permits any of the men whom I bring into your hands to escape shall give up his life in exchange. In other words, you kill every one of these guys, and if anybody doesn't die, I kill you. Okay? It's an incredible motivator. Okay? They die or you do. So these guys are standing there with swords going, I think I'd rather live and let him die. Verse 25. Then it came about, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the royal officers, go in and kill them, let none come out. And they killed them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the royal officers threw them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. They brought out the sacred pillars of the house of Baal, and they burned them. They also broke down the sacred pillar of Baal, broke down the house of Baal, and made it into a latrine to this day. Thus, Jehu eradicated Baal out of Israel. Look at that. Look at that. He made up great rules, and he had everybody follow those rules, and it sounds like if you were looking at Jehu, he accomplished exactly what God wanted done. I mean, who doesn't think that those tarot card reading places ought to be burned to the ground and turned into latrines? And then verse 30, the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in executing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your the fourth generation will sit on the throne of Israel. Now he's got the blessings. He's got the great promises. Look, it's possible you can even mistake the rewards of God in some area of your life for a statement of complete surrender. But Jehu wasn't completely surrendered. And you got to be asking by now, how do I know? There's no question that this guy was great. There's no question he accomplished a lot. That's not the issue. What true surrender is one thing. Let me show it to you. Get down to verse 29. However, circle the word, because that's the whole story. However, he did all this. He killed everything. He knocked everything down. He eradicated Baal. Isn't that great? However, as for the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin, from these Jehu did not depart, even the golden calves that were at Bethel, that were at Dan. In other words, Jehu was a nationalist, so he got rid of all the pagan gods of foreign lands and kept his own pagan god. Verse 31, look at verse 31. But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, look, with all his heart. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel sin. See, I need you to mark this out if you don't have it. Next to verse 29, surrender is a total commitment to God's priorities. Surrender is a total commitment to helping others become what God wants them to become. Surrender is a total commitment to protect ourselves from a casual violation of God's word. Surrender is a total commitment to be willing to give up what is dearest to us, the long-standing nationalist tradition of the golden calf. In other words, he was willing to take down other stuff, but there was one thing he wasn't going to get rid of. What did his life become about? His life became about the one thing. And because he wouldn't do that, verse 32 follows verse 31. Because he wouldn't do it, in those days the Lord began to cut off portions of Israel. Hazael defeated them throughout the territories of Israel, from Jordan eastward, from the land of Gilead, the Gadites, the Reubenites, Manassites, from Aroer, which is by the valley of Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan. Now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did with all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Jehoahaz, his son, became king in his place. Now the time which Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. You know what it says? It says because he wouldn't give up the one thing, he lost his influence, he lost his reputation, and he lost his reward. That's what it says. What was the one thing? The nationalist identity of pagan worship. How could a guy go out there and do all these things for God and have this one glaring idol in his life? There it was. Did you hear it? He had one glaring idol in his life. You know what it was? Anything that you made more important than following God is your idol. If it's your child, if it's your marriage, if it's your car, if it's your bank book, if it's your 401k, if it's your fame, fortune, power, pleasure, doesn't make any difference what it is. The one thing that you won't give up and lay it down for God, that's what your life will become. And so we retire the 10th king who just wouldn't give up the one thing. All right, we are in 2 Kings 13, and the reason that you're skipping over now is you were in 10 in our last session, and you don't pick up another line, another king, until 13. So what we have is Jehoahaz, who is, he reigned 17 years, and he is the son of Jehu. Jehu was the one who we walked through last time, and you see the lines as we go through them. If you come down and you see that the Israel king number 11 is in the line of Jehu, so it's line number 5, but Jehu is the first of that line, Jehoahaz is the second one. He will have 17 years on the throne, but precious little in the Bible. Don't get the idea with all of the names floating around that we know a lot about a lot of these guys. Remember that at best you may have one line in history. Very likely your long-term history will be on a stone with your name and 2 dates and a dash between, and ne'er a detail about what happened in the dash. So when we're looking at a king, somebody who's running the program, we expect to see something a little bit more. Now, I want to pick up in the first 9 verses, and I'd like you to meet what I'm calling a foxhole follower of God. This is a foxhole follower. One definition of immaturity is people who want the results without the process. Does everybody understand what I just said? One definition of immaturity is people who want the results without the process to go through to get the results. So it's an immature version of life that would look at, say, a skilled athlete and go, yeah, I want to do that. How many of you would like to know another language or play an instrument you can't currently play? And how many of you know that the only thing that stands between you and doing it is the determination to stay with it and get it done? Therefore, some of you go, well, I don't have time. You have exactly as much time as the people who did learn it. It's not about time. It's about choice. Life's about choices. Immaturity is when we excuse ourselves. We say, my life is harder than everyone else's. I can't do it. Okay? That's what immaturity is. So another corollary seems to be people who seem wholly unable to connect their actions to the circumstances that result from their actions. When you deal with a teenager and you are called to help and come in and help counsel them, one of the defining marks of an immature teen will be somebody who can't connect what they're doing to how people are reacting to them. How many of you know somebody who walks into the room and almost invariably gets the reaction that is not favorable by the way they act? They come in and something about them. Do you have a friend? I have a friend who's almost artistic about saying the wrong thing. Like, they're good at it. It just falls off of them. So, you put on weight. These are words that you should just never say to, like, there's no context unless the guy was out of a death camp and now he looks better. I mean, there's almost nowhere you can use the phrase, so you put on weight. But these are the kinds of phrases that fall off my friend. And no matter where he goes, he walks around mystified why people don't like him better. I don't like feeling bad about myself. So when you come in and say, gee, you look fat in that, the rest of the day, guess what I'm thinking about? How fat I look. Is that a pimple? I mean, it's like, now I'm walking around feeling like that's all that's on my head right now. I just have one big pimple. That's all that I am. My problem is that some people really don't connect the way people react to them with how they portray themselves. I'm going somewhere with this. Hang in there. As a people of God, we have to understand that many people are trying to live as though they have a walk with God, but they don't want the process of walking with God. They want people to respond to us as though we're walking in love with Jesus, but we're not. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of times we're not connecting the fact that we are less skillful at hiding who we are. I want you to meet what I'm calling a foxhole follower. This is an example of somebody who they aren't fully invested in walking with God. And you can see it. Somebody read the first 9 verses of chapter 13.
In the 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel at Samaria, and he reigned 17 years. He did evil in the sight of the Lord and followed the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which made Israel sin. He did not turn from them. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them continually into the hand of Hazael, king of Aram, and into the hand of Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael. Then Jehoahaz entreated the favor of the Lord, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, and how the king of Aram oppressed them. The Lord gave Israel a deliverer, so that they escaped from under the hands of the Arameans, and the sons of Israel lived in their tents, as formerly. Nevertheless, they did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, with which he made Israel sin, but walked in them, and the Asherah also remained standing in Samaria. For he left to Jehoahaz of the army not more than 40 horsemen, and 10 chariots, and 10,000 footmen, for the king of Aram had destroyed them, and made them like the dust at threshing. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoahaz and all that he did and his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel?
Okay, now you have 9 verses that capture a biography. This is almost like looking at the, about the author section and getting the whole biography. It's tiny. Now, by this point in the year, I can just give you my lessons, but I don't want to. What do you do with this? How do you handle it? Well, you should know already that I start and finish his life, sort of putting the 2 goalposts on it, right? So 1 through 9 is going to give me sort of a captured view of Jehoahaz. The second thing I would do is I would cross-reference and look elsewhere in the Bible where he shows up. For our purposes, let's focus just on these 9 verses and see if we can pick out some things. Because the stories are repetitive, in your mind you can turn off. Every story is planted there to tell you more than just what he did, but to tell you God's view of what he did, okay? So let's pick out, I think I picked out 5 things out of his life that are worth at least picking up. The first one is, he was a child of unearned privileges in verse 1. That is, he got power handed over to him because he was the son of his father. He didn't earn it, and we have no reason to believe that he was particularly good at it by reading the 9 verses. So even those who cannot claim to have royal blood have been given much, and they have no ability to just say, God never gave me anything. This guy put in his hands an opportunity to be king. The higher up the opportunity of service, the more visible the opportunity of service, the more it will be required of you to have a walk with God. He has none, or it doesn't appear that he has much of one. And so it will now not just harm him and his children, it will harm his nation. Go to the 2nd verse. He seems, can I use the word oblivious to God? He lived by the rules that suited him in verse 2. did evil in the sight of the Lord. Continued all the sinful practices of divided worship, the calf centers. And by now, that was considered normal. You know, what is evil on the first day is normal on the 212th day. And one of the problems we're having in this country is we're introducing evils that are, you know, everybody's up in arms this morning. I don't know if you saw this, but Flint, Michigan apparently has an enormously high lead content in their water that a doctor came on this morning and said, children who are drinking this water will be affected, and their children and their children's children. Now, if you go to the third verse, it looks like they sustained some serious losses. Why? Why did God bring losses into Jehoahaz's kingdom? Why were they losses? Okay, one of the things that should happen when a startling series of turnarounds and defeats happen in your life is you should go, gee, I wonder if it's me. I just think at some point you got to ask the question, am I contributing to my own downfall? And if you conclude, no, I'm actually walking with God and that's what's doing it, then you have a different set of problems, which is following God in the midst of troubles and those kinds of circumstances, and that's a great 1 Peter look. But if you conclude that your heart hasn't been truly dedicated to God, then maybe that has something to do with what's happening. God brings serious losses so that you won't ignore him. But he begins life ignoring God, and now he's oblivious to the things aren't working anymore. And as the losses become harder, he begins to consider his ways. And that's what they're for. Troubles are introduced to hard-hearted people in order to tenderize and soften them. Now you go to verse 4, and it says that he reaches up for help. Jehoahaz entreated the favor of the Lord, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, how the king of Aram oppressed him. We don't really know the details of what his calling on the Lord looked like. We don't know the details of how God relented on the pressure. What we do know is that in the middle of growing darkness, Jehoahaz reached up to the Lord. And that seems uncharacteristic of the rest of his life. But think about it. How many people ever stop to consider the Lord at all until they're confronted with things that they can't stand up to? So this is the big car accident, the big turnaround, the economic crash. And here's what I want you to see. Lots of people in America will point their finger when there's a downturn in the market at some immorality or something, but that's not the place of the believer. The believer isn't to say, you had this hurricane because you had casino gambling. That's not the point. The point is, whatever reason you have what you have, let's stop and consider God now. That's the believer's call. And what I find is the believer's call is not to condemn, but to allow people to become concerned in their walk with God and then try to relate where they're at. Now, look at verse 5. I simply have two words, got relief, without a question mark. God heard his cry. He ushered in help. And he couldn't deny at the time that it was the Lord's hand. You see in verse 5 that the Lord gave Israel a deliverer so that they escaped from under the hand of the Arameans. Whatever it was, however it was done, it was a period of Judges kind of, boom, God acted. Nobody looked at Samson and thought the power came from Samson. They knew it came from God. Nobody thought that there was one guy picking up the jawbone of an ass and killing off an army, and that was just because he was skilled. They knew that it was outlandishly God's work. So here, whatever this was, it was something profound. In this case, it appears to be the attack of Adad-Nirari, who is Adad-Nirari on the third. And Adad-Nirari came and attacked Damascus, which caused Hazael in Aram to turn his attention eastward, which got him off the back of the Israelites. In other words, one of the ways God relented on the pressure from Aram was to attack Aram from the other side. Now he's got to point his army that way, and they're not pointed at Jehoahaz anymore. So God has a way of answering a problem by a third party that we don't even know about. Now, what was his response in verse 6? God stepped in, he turned to the Lord stepped in, and the Lord took the pressure off, and that meant Jehoahaz gave his heart to the Lord and became fervent, right? Verse 6, what did he do? He went back to where he was when the pressure was off. The intersection of Jehoahaz and God did not result in transformation. It was relief, not redemption. How many people seek God in the middle of a divorce or flirting with, the worst situation of their life and in obedience, disobedience, and all of a sudden, God delivers them, and you see them a few weeks later in a supermarket, and they got too busy to stick with their God stuff. Like, they were all about being there when things were bad, and then 6 weeks later, a month later, a year later, they sort of fell off of it because, things are going okay now. There's an awful lot of people that come forward for Jesus, but they don't want Jesus. They want to fix for their problem. They really don't want him. Jesus requires that he gets the throne of our heart. He requires that. Most people don't want it. What they really want is the solution to their rent problem. That's what they really want, or how to get a better roommate, or whatever. Now, you can meet God, and you can even believe he did some great thing on your behalf, but that's not a personal relationship. Stop there. That's important. Jehoahaz is a picture. You can meet God. You can even be rescued by God in a moment, but do not make that the same thing as a personal relationship and walk with God. Because you're going to run into people who go, yeah, but Pastor, I know I'm going to heaven because when my mama died and I was so desperate and I was out of work for 3 months and I couldn't pay my bills, I got an envelope of cash in the mail and I knew God did that, and that's the basis of what they think is their salvation. It's not a relationship with God. It's not a walk with God. It's they met God and God did something. You're going to run into these people many times in your life, so Jehoahaz is your fallback place and go, wait a minute. Did it change and transform the way you walk today? By the way, why don't you stop and ask yourself a question that I would ask myself. You can study the Bible all day, but that doesn't mean you're walking with God. You can stay away from all the big sins. Look, I want you to stay away from all the big sins, and I want you to study your Bible all day so you can get your homework done. I want you to do that stuff. But here's the thing. That's not a walk with God. A walk with God is a relationship. You got to talk to him. You got to involve him in the things of your day. And it's easy even to be a GCBI student and get A's on your work and not be doing that.